Hello, and welcome to Aldsidu. Aldsidu is an old Saxon word that means old customs. And in this channel, we discuss the old customs or the old ways of all the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples who venerated the Asatru before Christianity came along. So this is going to be the first video in a four-part series on heathen holy days and timekeeping. And in the first video, I'm going to discuss the days and the years. So my goal is to be the most comprehensive video on YouTube, to make the most comprehensive video on YouTube on historical pre-Christian heathen holy days and timekeeping that posts more sources, dozens more, and proves its points so thoroughly that there can be no doubt to its accuracy. And at the end of this video, I will give the dates of the holy days of the Germanic Scandinavian religion called fyrn, Aldsidu, fornsiðr, various spellings. These words for the religion mean old ways or old customs. Today, almost all eclectic Asatru pagan orgs claim they follow old historical pre-Christian ways, but almost all the people in these groups have never read one page of an Edda or saga, nor have they done any serious research outside of Google, which Google is not serious research. This video is a culmination of over 20 years of research. And please feel free to pause this video to write down the sources. So the Scandinavian peoples are Germanic peoples. So here's a map of Europe in the 1st century. Iceland was uninhabited at this time. And the Germanic peoples included the Scandinavians. These are the tribes that venerated the Asatru. Now, over time, some Germanic Frisians, Alemanni, Chatti, Utes, Ungals, Saxons, Franks, these Germanic peoples did migrate to England or England, and they brought Germanic gods to Roman Britannia, which became Anglo-Frisian and Anglo-Saxon England. So eventually Germanic peoples would move into England as well. But in reality, while Proto-Indo-European peoples were a long time ago, shared the same root, Europe did evolve into many language groupings, many cultures, many people groupings, many religions that had different rituals, different holy days, different gods. For example, the Greco-Roman gods were different from the Basque gods, which were different from the Slavic gods, which were different from the Celtic gods, which were different than the Germanic gods, etc., including the holy days and the rites. But speaking of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, in ancient times, there were a few centers like Stonehenge, for example, where a wealthy group of priests were able to use very exact solar calculations to figure out when the solstice was. But 99.9% of European peoples could not do this with the naked eye. And most of them lived their lives as agricultural farmers, just trying to survive. And the first calendar that all people could observe just by looking at the sky, where there would be no arguing, was a lunar solar calendar. Now, a lunar solar calendar is a moon first, sun second calendar, where the sun is used to determine when a 13th moon would be added to a year. So, before the advent of the modern solar calendar, which was first brought to Europe by Julius Caesar and the Romans, who copied the solar calendar from the Egyptians, all the Eurasian peoples kept lunisolar calendars. And here is the source. Feel free to stop the video. A lunar solar calendar is 12 lunar moons. Now, everyone understands this. You take the number 5 and you add a th to it, it becomes 5th. You take a number 6 and add a th to it, it becomes 6th. Take the number 7 and add a th to it, it becomes 7th, etc. So the word moon and the word month are cognate. A month is a lunar cycle or a cycle of the moon, and this is true in all Germanic languages. English is a Germanic language from the Angles who migrated from the Germanic lands to England. So by these Germanic languages, adding a th makes it a moon in a sequence of moons. So there were 12 or 13 moons in a year, and the winter solstice would be used to determine when a 13th moon is added to the year. Bede, an English monk, wrote in the year 725 CE, when, however, an embolism occurred, that is, a year of 13 lunar moons, they added the extra moon to the summer. This is in De Temporum Rationae, chapter 15. So, to be very clear, there were 12 moons a year, but every 8 years, there would be 3 years where a 13th moon would be added to the calendar. And I'm going to come back to this because we're going to learn there's a 9-year bloat or a 9-year sacrifice, which is really every 8 years. The Romans called it a 9-year, but it was really every 8 years. There are 8 parts to the heathen day. And therefore, not only is 3 a very sacred number to the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples, but 8 is extremely significant as well. 8 parts of the day, every 8 years there's a major bloat sacrifice during Yule, etc. So this is the basics of the calendar that all Indo-Europeans had, and this continued in the Germanic religion. So Dr. Andreas Nordberg, he is the world's foremost scholar on Norse holy days. He makes it clear in his book on the dating of Yule that, and I'm quoting him, the pre-Christian Yule feast occurs at the first full moon after the first new moon following the winter solstice, while the disting took place at the third full moon according to the same method of calculation. So there's the source, and you can find this book for free on academia.edu. Now, Scandinavian peoples were Germanic peoples, as I mentioned already, in the lands of modern Germany, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, Belgium, northwestern Poland, etc. They all venerated the Aesir and they followed lunisolar calendars, and even the Germanic Scandinavian languages prove this. Okay, here's a source. And as I said before, Germanic peoples also moved to England. So the Germanic Scandinavian calendars were lunar solar, and the months corresponded to lunar cycles. And as I've mentioned before, the word month means cycle of the moon in all Germanic languages, especially English. So I've already kind of mentioned this by memory in a previous slide, but let's move into the naming of the moon. So in Old English, Manath, Old Saxon, Manuth, Old Norse, Manuther, Old High German, Manod, these all come from words like meno is a duration of the word for moon. Meno is the Greek word. And mene, moon, men, month, in Latin means month. So you can see these words are related all throughout European languages today. So again, the lunar solar calendar is reflected in Proto-Germanic term menoths, month, Old English manoth, Old Saxon manuth, Old Norse manuther, Old High German manod. And this is a derivation of the word for moon, meno, which shares its ancestry with the Greek mena, moon, men, month, and in Latin, menis. So you can see the source. Now, the Roman historian Tacitus, who was a Tacitus was a Roman pagan. I almost said he was a Germanic pagan. But, some of the Roman authors were not Christians because Christianity didn't, become Roman until later. But in the 1st century, Tacitus, the Roman pagan, wrote in his Germania about the Germanic peoples. And I state that Tacitus was a pagan because, he doesn't have the Christian bias as other authors would have against heathens. But Tacitus wrote that the community gathers if nothing unusual or sudden happens at certain times when the moon is new or full, because they consider this the luckiest beginning to discuss matters. Also, they do not calculate the number of days, but the number of nights. In this way, they state purpose and commitment. Night does precede the day. And this translation of Tacitus is by Dr. Andreas E. Zautner, a Scandinavian Swedish scholar on Germanic holy days. So even the earliest writings of the Germanic peoples by other pagans were that the Germanic peoples, night preceded the day. It began with the moon, and their times of gathering was on new or full moons. Now let's discuss the day. The day begins at sundown and ended at sundown. And this practice is seen in our American English world and language today. Notice how holidays begin at night, like Christmas Eve, for example. Notice the names for Germanic heathen holy days that we find in the sagas and historical sources. Winter nights, or Old Norse, Vinternatta. Winter nights, Old Norse, Midvinternatten. There's also phrases like 3 nights of Yule. And while I'm at it, let's discuss some old Saxon terms not on the slide. UUIH for the word wi, a sacred grove. The Old Norse equivalent would be ve, ve, for a sacred grove. Why is UUIH, way, important? Because even the modern German term Weihnachten comes from the word way, a Old Saxon word and Old High German word that meant sacred grove. Where did the bloats take place during the 3 major bloats a year of the Germanic Scandinavian calendar? At night and outdoors. So, sacred grove, nights, Weihnachten, is what the word for Christmas means. And Nachten is actually a plural word. It means nights. So, you have these phrases in the Germanic religion, winter nights, Yule, midwinter nights, and Weihnachten. Very important words. Now, the Roman historian Tacitus writes in his Germania, chapter 11, that the Germanic peoples had a day that began with night. He said night does precede the day. And as I said earlier, the day was split into 8 parts. So the first part of the day is midnight. And here's the Old Norse equivalent, ut. There's the Old Norse equivalent, morning, Old Norse, undern, midday, after midday, evening, and night. Now, I get this from Dr. Andreas E. Zautner's book, The Lunar Solar Calendar of the Germanic Peoples, but in reality, as I just had this on the other slide, look at the first poem in the Poetic Edda, Völuspá. Stanza 6, it mentions night, morning, midday, undern, and evening. So 5 of the 8 days, or 8 parts of the day, are mentioned very early in the Poetic Edda poem Völuspá. And if you go through all the Eddaic poems and the sagas, you're going to find all 8 of these words for times of the day. And obviously some of these words, because, the English language is a Germanic language and the Germanic peoples were heathens, that some of these words like after midday or afternoon, evening, abend, is related to opton, night, not, midday, noon, morning, midnight. Lots of these words come into our modern language, and the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples had these words. So let's read the Völuspá, chapter 6. So the aldermen went to their seats, the most holy gods, to hold council. To night and the waning moon they gave names, morning and midday, as well as undern and evening, to count the years. So Völuspá shows that night and the moon were used to count the years. So the moon is very important in the Germanic mindset because it was the #1 way to tell time. And of course, during the day, you could look at the sky and see where the sun was and understand, even though the day got longer at parts of the year and shrunk at parts of the year, the moon, you could still tell the waning as in the growing of the moon, and the waxing, the waning. There's waning is the decrease of the moon. The waxing is the growing of the moon. So, they had days of the moon, not days of the week, which I get into in my part 2 video. Now, I'm giving a theory here. The 9-year bloat. I said already that it's every 8 years, and why? The Romans counted differently. Like, Sunday happens every 7 days. Everyone in our modern world knows that. Saturday happens once every 7 days. Monday happens once every 7 days. I mean, this is common sense. But the Christians called Sunday the 8th day. Why they did this practice? Well, there's the week, and then after the Sabbath, there's the 8th day, the resurrection day. So my point is that when they said that there's a 9-year sacrifice, it means every 8 years there's a bloat or a sacrifice that happens. So we have 8 parts of the day, and we have a major bloat every 8 years. At least it's recorded by the Swedes at Uppsala and the Danes at Lera. We have evidence that the 8-year sacrifice was done at these 2 locations. Now, my theory is that, because no one understands why they did it every 8 days, so I'm making a guess. So this is a Robert Sass theory. But since the 8 parts of the day are important, and even Adam of Bremen says over the 8 days they sacrifice 9 animals each of the 8 days, to me, that's just a sign that 8 is important due to the times of the day. And of course, every 8 years, the solar calendar and the lunar calendar line up. Because, modern Asatru, I'm not here to rip on it, but it only uses the sun. It uses the sun only as its calendar. And it's not crazy to think that the Germanic peoples would use both the sun and the moon and make the moon foremost. This pisses people off, but in the Germanic world, the word man is related to the word moon, and the moon is masculine, and the sun is feminine. So there's Suni and Mani. One is a female and one is a male. Now, in other European cultures, Luna, like in Rome, that's where we get the word lunar from. It's the opposite. Apollo is a Greco-Roman male god of the sun, but the moon is female. And this shows how much the Proto-Indo-European peoples became different cultures, so to speak, because, all the people that the Proto-Indo-Europeans evolved into didn't keep up some of their super old ways. They evolved into different cultures. So, what's my point? There's an 8-year sacrifice. There's 8 parts of the day. There's 3 sets of 8s in the Futhark of runes. I think that these are little clues as to why it's an 8-year sacrifice. And it's the theory of mine. And by the way, we have archaeological evidence. The runestone of Blekinge and the runestone of Stenthofen, these 2 runestones prove that the 9-year bloat was every 8 years. And this is also in Dr. Zautner's book, The Lunar Solar Calendar of the Germanic Peoples. So, no ifs, ands, or buts, the 9-year sacrifice was every 8 years. So the Germanic and the Scandinavian year. The Old Saxon word for year is spelled G-E-R, but it's pronounced year. And the modern German word descends from this, Jahre. So, G and J sounds in Germanic languages are often Ys. The Germanic year had 12 or 13 runes, and we have many rune prime staffs and calendar rods that prove this. See Dr. Andreas Nordberg's book. We also have the literary evidence. Einhard, circa 830, lists 12 moons of the year in chapter 29 of Vita Caroli Magni. We also have Bede, who stated in 725 CE in De Temporum Rationae, chapter 15, that the year had 2 seasons, winter and summer. Bede also mentions 12 moon names. Bede says that winter and summer had midpoints, and Bede also gives 12 moon names. The Icelandic calendar, known as the Mysseri calendar, which was recorded in the 10th century, it was recorded sometime after the year 931 CE. It had 12 moons as well. bead and the prime staff show that the Germanic Scandinavian year was 12 or 13 moons divided into 2 seasons, which had quarter points of the year. Really, the 2 seasons of the year had midpoints. Hence, we have the phrases midwinter and midsummer. We do not have words like autumn or fall and spring in the Germanic languages, though I'll get into it later. The word haust for harvest often gets translated as autumn or fall later, but it's not really what the word meant. Germanic Scandinavian peoples counted the years by winters. For example, we have the Old Saxon word winter yetalu, meaning winter years. The year began with winter, as clearly shown in many saga passages. The most famous of this is Ynglinga Saga chapter 8, which states, Odin established the same law in this land that had been in force in Asaland. On winter day, the first day of winter, there will be a bloat for a good year. So right there, that's a sign that the beginning of winter was a bloat for a good year. The middle of winter is a good crop, and the third bloat is on summer day, a victory bloat. So Snorri also consistently uses winter's old. So it's not just an Old Saxon thing with winter yetalu, but Snorri uses it as well. Look at Heimskringla's Ynglinga Saga, chapter 34. There a great bloat was held, and many kings came as it was midwinter. And one winter, when many folks were gathered in Uppsala, King Yngvar was there with his sons who were 6 winters old. So that's really a Germanic way of counting age by how many winters one lived. So thank you so much. I'll get to part 2 of this video later. Please click like and subscribe. Visit us at www.aldsidu.com/blog and hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.